And without further ado, I am really excited to introduce you to Stephanie Malia Krauss. Stephanie is an expert on child and adolescent development, and especially on what makes and helps kids thrive. She's a former school administrator and social worker, and as a parenting expert, she's been featured on many media platforms, including PBS NewsHour. We are really honored to have published her book, Whole Child, Whole Life, and thrilled to have her host this webinar. So welcome, Stephanie. I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Jess. I am delighted to be here and so excited to be with all of you. It is really powerful to understand that there are folks joining from all over the world who have come together for a collective conversation on what our kids need to be well, and how we can help them thrive, not only now, but also in the future. If you see my eyes darting this way, it's because I am going to be looking at an external monitor while we are talking. But for those of you who maybe are just joining or missed it in the chat, I would love to know where you are from. And I will also have the chat pulled up while we are talking. So if you have ideas or comments or questions that come up, we're going to be covering a lot of ground. Feel free to drop them there. And to the extent that I can, I will try to keep my eye on it to see what questions you have and what ideas you have. So we are going to go ahead and get started. The focus today really is around what do our young people need to be ready for a world that is rapidly changing, that is often extremely challenging, and what do they need to be well? I think that fundamentally, if you had to boil down all of the work and writing that I do and understanding the place that I am coming from, I have taught early childhood. I was a primary elementary school teacher. I ran a secondary school, a high school in the States, and I've taught at the university collegiate level. And throughout all of those spaces, what has been most important to me is figuring out what do young people need to have a good life? And what do they need to be good humans? I think that is like fundamentally, if you boil it down, that is what is the essence of the conversation we're having today and what I've committed my life and my work and my writing to. So a little bit of background on me. You've started to get that already. Stephanie Malia Krauss. I am proudly Native Hawaiian and born and raised in New Jersey. I saw that both were represented. I also see some Illinois and Chicago area represented in the chat. So I have raised my kids in the St. Louis area, which is the Midwest in the US, and we live on the Illinois side. So you are talking to me from Illinois in the US in my basement. That's exactly where we are. And yes, Amanda, go Midwest, and also those other spaces I mentioned. I come work from an interesting intersection, which is that my background, as Jess mentioned, is in both education and in social work. Interestingly, I have also worked in higher education and workforce development. And so one of the things that I think is really powerful for the conversation we're having today is what and we'll talk about it in a moment. What young people need to be healthy and whole is also what they need to learn and develop, is also what they need to be employable and able to make a life that they love and work life that they love. So just know that that's a little bit of a preview. I talk about my work as Schoolhouse to the White House, just to say that I still work at the very local level as a consultant, but that I also work with clients all the way up to the national and sometimes international levels, again, around this question. And important to me is to share with you that I am very much on the front lines of raising kids right now. I have school-age children. That is a picture illustration of them, but here they are in photo form. My two biological kids are in the middle, and my two godchildren who spend summers with us are on the ends. And so the challenges that young people, our students, are facing are intimate to me because they are very personal. So many of us have complex, multifaceted roles when it comes for caring for kids. We may be teachers and also coaches, counselors, and also parents. We sort of have different levels. And I share that because everything that we talk about today is going to connect with any ways in which you work with young people. I think sometimes we have conversations about education and students and school and forget the complexity that we are dealing with humans and children who live in families and communities. The power here today, especially for those of you who are starting a new school year, is that science has progressed enough to show us that there's actually a set of proven practices that are talked about across whole child, whole life that you will get an introduction to today that support not only the well-being of young people, helping them to be healthy and whole, helping them to thrive. We'll look at what that looks like. But they also are the same practices that turn on the lights for learning and development. And for me, this is a very powerful idea because when I was training to be a teacher, there was so much of a focus on academics, and academics lived over here, and student supports lived somewhere else, lived over here. And actually, what I know now that I didn't know when I was teaching or running a school is that there is this central set of principles and practices that when we prioritize them, and this is what we're going to be talking about, we not only support the health and healing of young people, but we support their learning and their healthy growth and development. And for me, I think that that is completely game changing. So as we're talking about well-being, we are talking about learning. And as we're talking about healthy development, we're also talking about healing, which we know that our kids need to do because it has been a really complicated and stressful past few years. And likely they will continue to grow up and face crisis and challenge. For me, when I think about the ultimate goal, very often our schools will say, you know, we want to graduate our students and graduate them ready for college and careers. But I think that we have this chance to broaden the goal and say, really what we are about, what we want to do is make sure that young people can learn and live and love their lives, that they can build futures that they love. And so the other piece of this, as we start to dig in, is looking at what do our students, what do children need now that will actually extend and support them across the long of their life. And what I think about is like the wide of their life, all of the spaces and places where they spend time. I wanted to start here. These next two slides are slides that I show anytime that I talk because I think it's really critical for us to get our heads around what the impact of the past few years have been on kids. What we know is that young people are shaped and reshaped by their environments and by their experiences. And the environments and experiences of the past few years, obviously the COVID pandemic, but so much more of volatility and uncertainty and unpredictability, divisive politics, racial violence, all kinds of things that have been very challenging and often traumatic. That has actually rewired young people at a biological and cellular level. They are fundamentally different from past generations. One way to think about this, or the way that I think about this, is that today's kids, our students, are digital natives. They have never known a world without smart technology. And they're also disruption natives. They have been growing up for the past, 20 years. We have had unprecedented disruption and volatility and acceleration and innovation. It's just kind of this overwhelming whirlwind. And the way that that has changed their behavior shows up in a couple of different ways. On the one hand, our students operate in a world that we often can't enter into. That online virtual space, most of us are not natives in, unless, maybe for the youngest teacher who's like 22. Otherwise, we didn't grow up that way. And so there are a set of rules and a set of ways of living and interacting that happen in that virtual remote world that is sometimes hard for us to understand. The other thing about being a digital native is in terms of rewiring the brain or the chemicals in the brain is that many of those video games and apps and online platforms are designed not with child development and well-being in mind, but with repeat use in mind. And so young people who, particularly those who have a predisposition to addiction or addictive behaviors, they are engaging in adult platforms in terms of the science and technology behind how these things are developed that constantly want them to want more, to become addicted. And again, that sort of changes the chemicals. Many of you might be thinking more actively also about the role of AI and automation in more intelligent forms of technology. The same rules apply. Many of those technologies were not, most of them, created with child well-being and development in mind. And we are learning them alongside our kids and students, or sometimes they're exposed to them first. And so that is a really tricky thing. Think about it from like a immigrant or newcomer experience. If a parent of a child, you don't speak the language of the country that you have moved your children to, you don't know the culture or the customs, it's a real hard, tough place to be in. On the other side, being disruption natives, there is both the harm and the hope of this. On the harmful side, young people expect the world to be a scary place. They expect things to kind of fall apart. They expect crisis. Interestingly, when we interview young people, they say that what they want more than anything else is safety and stability and to know that they're going to be okay. And it's kind of the least likely thing that we can promise. Look at, again, the global pandemic as an example. We have to create safety and stability through our relationships with them in our classrooms and our schoolhouses. But it is something that they really crave because it's something they're not experiencing typically. My hope for this, especially as a mom of 10 and 12-year-olds, is that these big global problems have become personal for kids. And when problems become personal, we are often motivated to change them and to solve them. If you had somebody in your family or you yourself have struggled with cancer, you might donate to the cause or walk for the cause or want to get into the field of medicine because of the impact it has had on your family. Well, these big societal problems and economic problems are also personal problems. And so today's kids, our students, are positioned to be incredible change makers. I just actually want to go back here for a moment and say one thing. The result of being digital and disruption natives means that young people are kind of constantly stressed and stretched in ways that are pretty overwhelming. We are in the middle of an unprecedented global mental health crisis and seeing that in many ways, young people are pushed to the limit. One of the reasons why I wrote Whole Child, Whole Life, the book that the content from today's conversation comes from, is because I had been for years working on what young people need to be ready for the future of learning, the future of work. And when I would go out and talk about it, especially during the pandemic, I would hear from people who would say, we need to know what young people need to be ready for the future. And we are very afraid that our kids are going to burn out or give up before they get there. What do young people need to be well right now? And so that's where we're going to head. That's what we're going to look at. So the first place where we start is, in order to know what a young person needs to be healthy and whole, what they need to thrive, we need to know who they are. So oftentimes when you talk about whole child in education, it really just focuses on the individual kid and what they need socially and emotionally and academically. It doesn't really go beyond that. Today, we want to think about the individual kid, but we also want to think about the outside details, the kind of context clues that make a broader portrait of not only who they are, but how they live and what they need and, what their life is like. So the first three pieces, if you are looking at the visual on the screen, are, I think about these parts. So this is demographics and determinants, age and stage, brain and body, as what are the things that are important for me to know about this kid? And the next two pieces, people and places and strengths and struggles, are what is important to this kid. We have to put both of those together in order to be an adult who really cares well for young people and supports their well-being and supports their thriving. We need to know the important details about their life, and we need to know what is important to them in their life. The important details help us take good care of them, and the important pieces help them feel well cared for. And it's the both and that allows us to give that really, truly holistic, comprehensive support. So we're going to walk through these five pretty briefly, and then we're going to keep going. So demographics and determinants are kind of the crude, like one-dimensional profiling that we do to students and to children, whether we want to or not. This is based on the data we have, either that the school have shared with us or what we can see with our eyes or what we have been told by other people. What do we think we know about who this child is and how they live? So based on typically how a kid looks and how a kid lives and the available data that we have on them, what are the assumptions we can make about their learning and about their life? Profiles based on demographics and determinants are largely harmful. They're largely harmful because we bring all of our assumptions about what it means to live this way, what it means to look like this, what it means to have these diagnoses or challenges. And this kind of profile is also extremely helpful and informative because it begins to give us insight into how the world treats this child, how the child experiences the world, and the risks and realities that they experience every day, as well as the resources that they need. And so just know it's important to capture that information, but to kind of like draw it in pencil so you can erase and change things as you get more information. Hold that open curiosity. The next piece is understanding where young people are developmentally. So this is socially and emotionally and academically, even spiritually. There's spiritual development for young people. So the most important thing that I want you to take away from this piece in August of 2023 is that the past few years have aged kids quickly, but staged them slowly. Here's what I mean. Students all around the world, kids all around the world have been exposed to very adult, scary things, and it has aged them prematurely. Some more than others. But development, child development is inherently social and emotional. And they were really limited in what that looked like. And so this growing up fast and slow is a really critical thing to begin to grapple with because all of the developmental milestones have gotten shaken up. So if you are a primary school teacher and you feel like, let's say you teach grade 3 or 3rd grade, that your 3rd graders felt more like 1st graders or grade 1, you're probably right, because some of those developmental milestones didn't get taken care of. So while the pandemic viral infections may be going down or getting less severe, the developmental shakeup is going to continue with them all across growing up life. So we've got to get a handle on that. The next piece of information that is really crucial to get a handle on is the thing that often we have the least amount of training in, and that is where young people are health-wise. This is an area that I have had to grow in on my own more than any of the other areas. Even though I have graduate degrees or tertiary degrees for global folks in education and in social work, I never, ever got a class in pediatric and adolescent health. And yet, behavior and learning and development are so linked and connected to how a young person is health-wise. I'm going to give you a very quick example. My 12-year-old, when he was in second grade, he was 8 years old, developed incredibly intense symptoms of depression. So much so that he even said that he didn't want to be alive. Now, I met my husband in social work school, and so we immediately thought he just needed therapeutic care. We were also mortified. You know, my 8-year-old was depressed. Around the same time, he had to have surgery, and the anesthesiologist he came out of surgery, and the anesthesiologist came up to us and said, "We think that your son needs a sleep study." And we were like, "What? A sleep study?" So we got him a sleep study, and it turned out that our 8-year-old was waking up more than 100 times a night. Now, I would go in the morning and his blankets would be on the floor, but he's always hot. So I thought he would just get hot in the middle of the night and kick his blankets off. Well, it turned out his legs were moving nonstop, and it was waking him up just enough that he didn't remember it, but he was exhausted. And his legs were moving that much because he was iron deficient. That lack of sleep was causing 98% of the symptoms we were seeing. He needed iron, a new pillow, and time, and all of those symptoms resolved. Well, those had impacts in the classroom and at home. And so you don't have to become a healthcare provider, but you do have an obligation to educate yourself on what are injuries or illnesses or deficiencies, or what are changes in sleep or nutrition, and the impact that can have on behavior and the impact that can have on learning and development. I was with the school district earlier this morning, and the thing that I advise them in is that with families, you can just ask the question really openly of, what should I know about your child health-wise that could help me support them here at school? And create that open conversation of, can I tell you if I notice something? Will you tell me if you notice changes at home? So this is the first part of that portrait. What is important to know, the important details about this kid's life. That second piece, people and places, strengths and struggles, is what is important to the kid. How do you get to know a kid's world? I talk about this in the book as being a cartographer of children's worlds. How do we start to map all of the spaces and places where they spend time, all of the people who are important parts of their life? And how do we give them the power to invite us into their world and to tell us who the important people and places are? It's a big reveal on the whole of who they are. If you teach secondary school or high school and your students have access to phones to take photos, have them create a slideshow of their life, of how they would want to explain it. And they can show it to you privately, or they can show it to the class. If you teach primary school, early childhood, elementary school, double down on morning meetings, on having kids talk about their weekends. The last part, strengths and struggles, before we talk about the science of thriving, is what I think about as like the alchemy, the magic, the mystery, the science of caring for kids, which is when a child walks into the room where you are, do you know enough about them that you know immediately if they are okay or if they are not? You have a sense about them. I think about this as bringing a young person into high definition. You know about their character, you know their skills, you know what they love, you know what they struggle with, you know what they have suffered from. This is so much of the work of getting to know the whole of who they are. So this work happens in exceptional ways. So in the beginning of the year, through conferences and surveys and conversations with families, I'm seeing in the chat, yeah, get to know me slides, all of those projects. So you want to match the exceptional with the everyday. How are you integrating this every day into the consistently sort of practice of getting to know kids, because they're constantly changing. They're always evolving. So we match getting to know the whole of who children are. I love icebreakers. Yes, Emily, that's a great idea. With how do we know if they're doing well, if they are thriving? So I think about these 5 pieces in Whole Child, Whole Life. This is the back of the book. So we're starting with the end in mind. These are like the 5 lights of thriving. And what's really important to know is that these 5 indicators of thriving are every age and stage of life, which means this is how we know children are thriving, and this is how we know we are thriving. It is the same. Now, very often in education, we can say, oh, I'll take care of these 2 things, and the social worker will take care of this, or the parent will take care of this. We kind of divide and conquer. Well, I'm here to tell you that when it comes to the science of thriving, all 5, sorry, I just put up 10 fingers, all 5 of these lights have to be turned on, because if a child is feeling unsafe in your classroom, in your learning community, they cannot thrive. Even if they are learning, even if they are healthy, if they do not feel safe, they cannot learn, and they cannot live, and they cannot love their life in the ways that they would be able to otherwise. Similarly, if a child feels safe, but they are not learning, they are bored out of their mind, they're not thriving. So I want you to think about thriving as a state of being. I kind of think about this as like the EKG, if you've ever seen kind of like a heart monitor that goes up and down. In fact, I might have a picture of it later in the slide deck. And so our job is to just try and keep that line above the flat line. We want to keep thriving going like this. It doesn't mean that they're going to be totally on fire and totally full of joy at every moment. We just want to try to extend the number of moments that they have that experience. So let's go ahead and look then at what are the practices that help us to turn all 5 of these lights on. So there are 10. There are 10 practices that work in Poland, in the UK, in Indiana, in Oregon, in Hawaii, in New Jersey. Doesn't matter what culture, what context. The thing that is so encouraging for me as somebody helping to care for kids is that these are super timely practices, and they're also absolutely timeless. You're going to look at them and be like, yes, I know these are important. And I guess what I want to tell you is, yes, they are important. Yes, they matter. They mean more than they have ever meant before. They matter more than they have ever mattered before. So these are the 10 practices. Think about them as the live wires that power those 5 lights of thriving. So we're going to go ahead and spend probably the rest of our time. Let me check my time. Oh, we've got plenty of time. Looking at how these practices group together. So if you hopefully grab a copy of Whole Child, Whole Life, if you read it by yourself, read it, with your team or with your school, just know that like the way I would approach this is I would read and reflect on all 10, and then I would choose one of these clusters to really prioritize and focus from a, how do I change my practice? What do I want to focus on this year? So the first practices are the internal foundational ones. This is, the kind of basics of thriving and well-being. This is a great point to remind you that the same things that these 10 practices are the same things that align to the science of learning and development. So when you do these 10, you not only are supporting health and healing, you're also supporting learning and development, which is a very, very powerful and potent mix, especially for kids right now, given what they have experienced and what they will continue to experience. So these 3 practices, meeting basic needs, prioritizing mental health, and investing in personal interests, are the bare minimum basics of supporting thriving for young people, both now and in the future. So the reason why I called these whole life practices is because they work across the long of life, from early childhood to old age, and they work in any kind of setting. You can be a homeschooler, you can run a youth program, a youth center, an NGO, being a traditional school, a non-traditional school. These are always the practices that will matter. For today, as we think about a new school year, a couple of things that I just want to flag for you. When it comes to children, they have the sort of typical basic needs of essentials. You know, they need housing and they need clean water and they need food and those pieces. But children also need play and rest as basic needs, and purpose. They need a sense of meaning and purpose. Also, they need novelty. So, you know, we are like curious. We are meant to be learners by design. Kids lost some of those opportunities for play and rest in the last couple of years. And even when they came back in that COVID context, their play was sometimes restricted, or there wasn't enough time for rest. And so I would just implore you, encourage you to create opportunities and moments where young people can explore and experience and play, and really sort of have those moments of novelty, the kind of fun parts of learning, experiential learning, project-based learning, competency-based learning, service learning, you know, nature-based learning. All of these things are really primed for these basic needs. Mental health we talked about, but I would absolutely, if you haven't already, look into mental health first aid. It's something I talk about extensively in the book. I also have a list of symptoms of here's what you should know about mental health challenges and signs and symptoms something's wrong. Here's what it looks like if a young person is experiencing grief or adversity. Like, what are those actual signs and symptoms? Very often they're all interlocked. The one thing that you should just know about this piece before we move on is that given what we're seeing from a mental health perspective, it is not a matter of if a child will have a mental health challenge, but when a child will have a mental health challenge at any age or stage, littles, kids, tweens, teens, young adults. And so the question is, are you equipped with it? Because we don't have enough mental health professionals to support the needs of all of the kids who need it. And so we all have to become cross-trained in providing some mental health care, just as a core requirement of spending time with kids. The next cluster of practices are the social and cultural ones. And Anne-Marie, I love seeing about pre-K. I started in pre-K, moved on to fifth grade, and then ran a high school that was on a college campus. And I will say that, like, creating, you know, play is where so much learning happens. And it can still exist even for the tweens and teens. We just have to be really creative about what it looks like. So these next three practices are the social and cultural ones, the kind of outward facing into the world. Things I think you should know here at the beginning of the year with these practices. One is that relationships, in the research, nothing is more profoundly impactful than healthy, nurturing, nourishing relationships. They help all of us learn better, live longer, be happier. It's just like the most powerful medicine there is, being surrounded by healthy, nurturing relationships. There are a couple of relationships I talk about in the book that are important to tend to. We are responsible for helping kids to form a relationship with themselves, to be in relationship with us, to help kids be in relationship with each other. And we're also responsible for supporting and nurturing relationships with the other adults who are in that kid's life. So taking time to really think about not only relationships are important and knowing that at an instinctual level, but also how to nurture and support them in intentional ways is really key. When it comes to community and belonging and identities and culture, that could be an entire I mean, any of these could be an entire other conversation. But what I want to just leave you with is that the central task of growing up is answering the question, who am I? Identity development, especially for adolescents, so that's 11 to 26, is who am I? Who are my people? Where do I belong? What do I want to be when I grow up? Who am I? Who am I becoming? It's that be and becoming piece. And so that's going to happen whether we want it to happen or not. We can't slow it down. We can't stop it. So we have to be well educated into how to support kids as they are exploring their various identities and trying to answer and resolve those questions for themselves. The next set of practices are around time, both what has happened in the past for young people and how that is affecting them in the present, and also this long, stretchy possible life that they have ahead of them. So this is, past, present, and future. When it comes to past, as you are thinking about the beginning of the school year, I'll just bring out one insight. If you are a teacher in this room, this virtual room, and you have your students come in to see you, just remember that they are bringing with them not only themselves, but all of the relationships they have ever had with teachers before you, all of the experiences they have ever had with school before you, and they are going to be responding and behaving based on those experiences. And so as you get to know the whole of who they are, please take time to ask them or ask their families what their experience has been with school, with teachers, their best teacher, their worst teacher, all of those pieces, so that you have an understanding of that history. There's so much more to say in that space, but that's just like the one pro tip as you go into the beginning of the year. And then on the future side, the one thing I just want you to pay attention to attend to, is that these big global problems, they feel crushing. And we know this because we feel it ourselves, we experience it. As much as you can help young people engage in envisioning all of their possible futures. So I actually advocate in the book for teaching kids how to become future forecasters. It's a really cool section. I interviewed professional futurists for that chapter to really understand how could young people help predict a future and then begin seeing themselves as playing a role in creating better and brighter futures. That is a deeply healing experience, and it also helps them to envision what life can be. The last two practices, transcendental is the research term, are service and spirituality. So we don't often talk about spirituality for those of us who operate in a public education context. But when we're thinking about children and their well-being and development, what you need to know is that young people not only ask the question of who am I, what will I become, where do I belong, but they also ask, am I a part of something bigger than myself? And is there a reason why this is happening? Is there something out there? Is there a reason? When they engage in service, change making, civic engagement, service learning, they are a part of something bigger than themselves. It's an inherently spiritual, life-giving practice, as long as it's done in the context of community and in healthy ways. And then when we engage young people in kind of nurturing their natural spirituality, their inclination to see the world as big and bold and to explore things that bring them a sense of purpose and meaning, we are also supporting their development and well-being. Service and spirituality are also deeply protective when it comes to trauma and healing and health overall. So where we're going to end before we shift over for plenty of time, 6.5 minutes, I think, of questions, which start thinking about your questions or things you want to mention for the chat, and you can throw those in for Olivia, is that what is good for young people is often good for us. So in case you can't see the visual, I'm going to read this end quote from the book. It says, the art of this work is doing what is best for kids and having it also be good for us. It is the everyday actions that contribute to our collective well-being and in nurturing relationships, environments, and experiences that enrich everyone in them. And so my encouragement to you before we shift over to questions and book giveaway is that you have this rare opportunity based on getting your hands on Whole Child, Whole Life and the conversation we had today to be liberated, to really prioritize the collective well-being of everyone in your care, which includes you. And that in doing that, you will be supporting the best pieces of what help young people and you to come alive and also to learn and to work. It's a wonderful, efficient use of our internal resources, but it also stretches us from life-saving practices all the way over to life-giving practices, which I don't know how you feel, but in my mind is sort of the heart and soul of the work that we do. So I'm going to go ahead, Jess, and switch us over here, or maybe keep it over here. I'm not sure, Olivia and Jess, you'll have to tell me. So if we can take, if we have time to take a couple questions and then the giveaway, but that ends it for me here.
All right. And then I didn't see any questions coming in. I think you covered everything as we were going, Steph. But if you do have any questions that come up later that you think of that you want to send to us to get Stephanie's opinion on and poke her brain a little bit, you can just send those to us at info@corwin.com and we'll send those along to Stephanie for you.
If there are questions, this is your moment. And Maria, I'm so glad it struck your a chord in your heart as a teacher. I felt like this was getting back to like the art and science and magic of what it is to care for kids. Penny, thank you for sharing that story. And Chloe, I would love to work with your principal if you decide to choose this as a book study. It has been really fun. I've been on the road and will continue between now and November doing sort of back to school support for folks. Anyone can email me for a signed book plate. Yes, I would love to send you one. So just make sure you buy the book and then send me that email. I'll go ahead and stick it back in the chat. This is also a great place if you'd be interested in having me connect with your school or speak or consult and work with your school on these kinds of practices. You can send me an email there. And you can also here, that gives you some more insights into the book. And I send out periodic emails on thriving. Okay. So Margaret's asking, can you address what effective play looks like for tweens? So lucky for you, Margaret, I am the mama of a tween and my godkids just came out of that space. So in this moment, play can look actually very similar to what it looked like in later childhood. So like 4th, 5th grade, because our tweens missed out on so many years of play. And so what we find even with high schoolers is, I was with a high school principal and she brought out like a splash pad. And so we see that kids might think that it's silly, but once they start it, they really love it. So I would say, taking out game boards, cards, having them do different sort of like icebreaker culture activities, even versions of morning meeting can be really good. I am a big believer that those tween years, intermediate school, middle school, can still benefit from recess. Having different, sports equipment outside and different things can be really powerful. So Doris is saying college students love to play with K2 curriculum class. Yeah, so inter-age opportunities are really good too. So sometimes you can liberate and give older kids permission to play by having them like help younger kids. That can be a really nice thing as well. Board games are amazing to use. I also will say, we didn't talk about this, but I think that teaching young people stress management and stress reduction techniques is as important as teaching life skills and academic skills right now. It's a really key strategy because stress levels are so high. And we know as adults that doing things that feel playful, which could include exercise, playful or restful, back to those two basic needs, can help us bring the stress levels down. Sorry, I know, Margaret, you asked the question and said thank you, but another really good one is improv, teaching kids improv, which is also a great like future employability skill, and having them act out things. Yes, Anne Marie, stress, and we can't get rid of their stress, right? We can only teach them how to manage it, but it's going to be a mainstay in their life. Any other questions? So as you can tell, if you're not in the chat, I am actively looking at it, and I'm super impressed. I've already had some folks send me their address. So that's great to see that you're looking into the book.
I think we had a question from Lisa, a little bit higher. So it was, how do I balance agreeing with this mindset for my learners and the expectation of the weight of so much content?
Yeah, Lisa, God, I feel you so much. I was so grateful this morning to have superintendents and principals in the room, because the tendency toward compliance and completion can be an opposing force with well-being and development. And so what I would do, so I'm actually going to take you back. So close your eyes if you get dizzy. I'll tell you when to open them. Okay, open your eyes if you close them. So what I would do is, as you are lesson and unit planning, I would actually look at what whole life practices can I integrate in this way? Can I actually build into the content? So instead of looking at them as separate, as much as possible, I would try to braid it together, and then make sure that you're kind of rotating through that, you might hit build community and belonging a lot, but make sure you don't forget about service, about being a force for good. So I would integrate that into unit and lesson plans. And then I would I already have like a teacher has pulled into her morning reflection a more kid-centric version of like, how safe and supported do you feel? What else, can I be doing? So another piece is like integrating this into the regular check-ins. Any other questions? Okay, I see a couple have come in. Yes, and we will make sure that my kids have bed too, that we get to bedtime on time. Danielle, I feel you. Okay, Francisca, counselor at an elementary school SEL scheduled time as well as counseling class. We play lots of games where they can act down emotions and find ways to calm down. So I love that your school is doing that. I think that my hope would be that every school takes so much of what happens in a set-aside SEL class or counseling time and begins to integrate it into the everyday, every adult, every occasion. And so as much as possible, that we can cross-train. And that again gets back into Lisa's question of like integration into content. There are some learning experiences that turn on all 10 of these practices. I saw there was somebody here from Hawaii. So in Hawaii, they have something called aina-based education, which is land-based education. And they're projects that happen out in the community, out in nature, on, taro farms, fish ponds, in the community. And those are designed to really integrate all 10 of these. So the other thing that you can be thinking about if you're on the academic teacher side is how you can build out experiential learning and project-based experiences where you're really attending to 5 or more of these practices at one time. And Sheila, I am going to just let you know, so you'll have to buy the book through Corwin. Maybe Olivia, if you can drop a direct link for folks to buy. And then if you send me, Sheila, that address so I don't lose it, to that email, I can send you, if you tell me how many books you ordered, I can send you signed book plates. Great. Thanks, Olivia. So just click on that link and you can buy the book. Let me go back to the close your eyes if you get dizzy. There we go. So there's that promo code so you can get a discount. And then I'm happy to sign if you email me. Okay, so Keith is talking about gameplay. Games like Sorry teaches social skills. Yes. So, Keith, I wrote this first book called Making It, about how to get young people ready for the world, a changing world. And I recommended board games and, again, improv in so many things because it's a very low risk way for kids to not get too embarrassed or not too self-conscious, to really be practicing some of these core skills. And Julie, if you can just send, email address to that other email, or maybe you're connecting with other folks, just make sure, just so you all know, I don't have my inbox pulled up, so I will not be able to capture chat if you're putting address or information into the chat. Any other questions? I think we have a couple minutes, got plenty of time. I love that, Keith. So if you're not following the chat, Keith was talking about playing the game Sorry, which I don't know if it's available in an international context. It's a nice, fun, easy one, and that his class practiced how to say sorry in a fun and silly way. I'm realizing now I'm responding to chat. Some of your chats are going to everyone and some are just going to speakers. So if you're feeling a little disjointed, I'm responding to everything that I'm seeing. Any other questions? I will give one caution. I'm gonna go back here since we do have that time. Very often in education, we decide, this belongs in the SEL class, or this belongs to school counselors, or this belongs to teachers. And I think what I wanted to make clear is that we all are collectively caring for kids. So when my children start back to school this week, one of my younger child will be in grade 5, in 5th grade. And I will drop him off at 8:30 in the morning. And he does after school program at the school. And I will not pick him up until 6 p.m. at night. He is growing up in his school building. I am missing all of those hours. And I have to believe and hope with everything in me that the adults who are responsible for him recognize that they are responsible for more than delivering content and completing curriculum, that they are responsible for the collective care of my kid. And what I want from my kid is where we started. I want him to be a good human. I want him to have a good life. I want him to be ready for whatever the world throws at him. And I want him to be well. And those are the promises and pieces that are so crucial for us to not only grasp and grapple with, but to really commit ourselves to. Any last questions or last thoughts? I'm still looking at the chat, so feel free to add anything else in. I hope that you'll pick up a copy of the book. I wrote the book that I knew that I needed and that I heard from thousands and thousands of educators and social workers and school counselors and principals and parents that they wanted to. This is also a book that, last week I was in a place and the janitor had been invited to hear me speak. And he came up to me after and talked about how important it was for him to hear it, because very often we only talk to teachers or we only talk to school counselors, but we all are caring for these kids. And so if you have a coach, a counselor, a janitor, a librarian, or if you are one of those, security, any of those roles, if we are interacting with kids, this content is relevant to us. Lauren, I can't wait for you to get your book either. And I think I'll just drop one more time for anybody who may have missed it. So if you're interested in getting in contact about me supporting you for a book study, if you want a signed book plate, also if you're interested in a bulk buy, if you are an education leader and you want this for your team or for your staff, this is a great way to get in contact with me, and we can work to support you in that way. All right, Jess, Olivia, Corwin team, anything else as we wrap up here?
I think that's about it. I think we could go ahead and wrap that up if there's no other questions. But thank you so much, Stephanie, for your time here today. I think that was an amazing presentation. I know everyone in the chat was really grateful. And yeah, thank you for everyone who joined us in the chat as well. And I hope that you all have a wonderful beginning of your school year and a wonderful rest of your week.
Yes, everybody, have best of luck to you as you start your new school year. I hope that this has helped get you excited and gotten the energy flowing about the powerful, incredible responsibility you have and opportunities you have with kids this year. And please be in touch.